Connor fumbled in his pocket a small box with an expensive ring, the money for which he had been saving for 6 months, sighed happily, and imagined again how he would finally propose to his beloved tonight. He had such a clear picture of how Melanie would say yes to him that he could not even think that she could refuse him. They met 1 year ago. Connor got a job as a cab driver, and since he did not know the city well, he got lost. He stopped the car in an unfamiliar alley and decided to ask for directions from passers-by, but before he had made 2 steps, some girl literally bumped into him. She was very frightened and asked him to get her out of here. Connor saw that the woman was being chased by a man who had been drinking heavily, and it would probably have made more sense to put the girl in the car and drive away, but Connor had never been a coward. He grew up in an orphanage and from a young age learned to defend himself, and at that moment he resolutely rushed toward the man and, with a few precise blows, put his attacker on the ground. Only after that, Connor took the shocked girl home, and so began their romance. Connor sat in a cafe and anxiously looked at his watch. Melanie was supposed to be here an hour ago, and Connor had already begun to worry if something had happened to her. He hesitated to call, fearing that she would eventually get cranky and not come at all. Finally, he couldn't stand it any more and grabbed the phone to call her, but suddenly he became numb with shock when he read an unnoticed message from Melanie that had come an hour ago. "Don't wait for me. I'm not coming. I guess what you want to tell me today, and I don't want to hear it. I don't love you. I'm sorry. It's over between us. I love Paul." Connor was dumbfounded. Paul was Melanie's ex-boyfriend, and he was the one who had pursued the girl the day they met. They had a fight, Paul lost his temper, and Melanie got afraid of him. It never occurred to Connor that they continued to meet behind his back. Unable to cope with the emotions that came over him, Connor went to a bar and drank heavily for half an hour. He tried to stifle his resentment at the betrayal of his beloved and his despair, and he did not even know how he would live on. Connor walked through the night city, barely able to keep his feet and poorly aware of where he was going and why. Suddenly, something white flashed ahead, as if a ghost, and Connor looked ahead in surprise, trying to figure out where he was. Suddenly he realized he had come to the city bridge, where disillusioned and desperate people often took their own lives. "Well, no, I certainly won't do that," thought Connor, and suddenly he heard the sound of a body falling into the water. "Oh, again? They've been doing that a lot lately," he heard a hoarse old voice. "What do you mean?" asked Connor, unable even to understand what had just happened almost in front of his eyes. Out of the darkness, a homeless old man came out to him and, waving his hand wearily, told him that a young woman in a white dress had just jumped from the bridge into the river. From what he heard, Connor finally sobered up and rushed sharply to the railing of the bridge. He looked down and saw something white on the surface of the water. He didn't waste a second and jumped down, but when he was in the water, all he saw was a white veil floating on the surface. He dived several times before he found the woman and was able to pull the lifeless body to the shore. Connor immediately began artificial respiration, but she showed no signs of life. He almost despaired, but suddenly her body twitched, water gushed from her mouth, and she coughed. The woman revived, and opening her eyes, tried to understand what was happening to her. Connor, trembling from the stress he had undergone, took a close look at her face and involuntarily recoiled. He recognized her, and the woman, judging by her stunned look, recognized him too. Connor had known Vanessa since he was a child. His mother had worked for many years as a maid for Vanessa's wealthy parents, and they lived in their huge house. Mom considered herself a sort of housekeeper, and even let herself think that these people treated her like family. Unfortunately, soon Connor's mother realized how wrong she was. When Connor was 9 years old, she was diagnosed with cancer. The poor woman hoped that the owners, honouring the years of faithful service, would help pay for her treatment. But they had a different opinion, or rather, the head of the family. He, without the slightest embarrassment, literally put the dying woman and child on the street, so as not to create problems for himself. The owner's wife had no right to vote, so there was nothing she could do. The only person who felt sorry for Connor and his dying mother was the owner's daughter, Vanessa. The disease quickly progressed, and soon Connor became an orphan and ended up in an orphanage. And now he was holding Vanessa, and genuinely not understanding how this could happen to a girl from a wealthy and prosperous family. "Vanessa, why did you do that?" asked a shocked Connor. "I have a wedding today," whispered Vanessa and cried. "I was cheated on, Connor. My fiancé cheated on me with my best friend right at the wedding. I saw them with my own eyes in the back room, and I couldn't stand it. My head was fuzzy with pain and resentment. I don't even know how I ended up here." "Oh, it's horrible, of course, but it certainly wasn't worth your life. Anyway, what a coincidence. I also lost my fiancé today, and just like you, I do not know how I ended up on this bridge, as if fate had brought me here." Connor grinned bitterly and showed Vanessa a small box with a beautiful wedding ring. Vanessa looked at the ring admiringly, and Connor offered to go to his home, take a shower, change and drink hot tea, and tomorrow to decide what to do. She agreed, and an hour later at Connor's house, Vanessa took a hot shower, threw off her hateful wedding dress, and wrapped in a huge bath towel, telling her saviour a sad story. As it turned out, Nicholas, Vanessa's fiancé, was her father's business partner, and Vanessa disliked him at all, but her father constantly pressured his daughter to communicate with him, and eventually insisted on the wedding. Her father was a tough businessman, and through this marriage he sought to consolidate his position and expand his business. Vanessa tried to resist and even wanted to leave her parents, even though she would lose financial support from her father, but eventually she gave up. "I'm not a fighter. I, like my mother, love silence and painting. I always liked living in my quiet world. Even now I can spend all day at the easel and not notice what's going on around me. My father promised me he would set me up my art studio. I believed those promises and gave in. Besides, I was also scared to go alone against a whole world that I don't know at all." "Vanessa, I understand you. I was once left alone and didn't know how to live in the world too. Do you remember my mother?" "Of course. I could never forgive my father for his cruelty to you. I can't even imagine how you felt then." "Yes, it wasn't easy, but I got through. I just didn't have any other choice. Now I know how to stand up for myself, and if you need support, I can help you. You can stay in my apartment, and we'll figure something out." Vanessa looked at Connor with hope and gratitude. Although her father had treated him and his dying mother so cruelly, he had saved her from certain death today and was ready to help her further. Vanessa agreed to stay with him overnight, and after all the events of that awful day, Vanessa quickly fell asleep, feeling completely safe for the first time. While she slept, Connor settled in the chair opposite and immersed himself in memories from his childhood. He caught himself thinking about Vanessa all those years, because that kind little girl had been his first love. He well remembered how she loved to draw, and that Vanessa had painted her first portrait just from him. When her parents were away, they often played together, but the girl's father did not approve of such friendship. He disliked the fact that the housekeeper lived in the house together with his son, and often advised the woman to send the boy to an orphanage. These words always brought tears to Connor's mother's eyes. She was very much afraid that her son would do something bad in the owner's house, and they would be kicked out, but she could not part with him. Connor fell asleep only in the morning, and when he woke up, he saw that Vanessa had already made him breakfast. I thought all morning and finally made up my mind. Now that I have you in my life again, I am no longer afraid. I'll file divorce papers right away, and if my father doesn't like it, I'll pack up and leave home. Is your offer of help still on the table?" "Of course," replied Connor. "I'll drive you myself and wait at the gate. If you need my help, call me right away." At home, Vanessa was in for a huge scandal. Her father was not at all interested in Nicholas's infidelity. He was only concerned that his daughter had dared to leave the wedding. "How dare you disgrace me in front of all the guests? Where have you been all night?" "Daddy, can't you hear me at all? I almost died. Connor saved me, although you threw him out on the street with his sick mother once. You will never understand me, I see. I'm leaving." Vanessa left home, and Connor, as promised, was by her side all the time. The girl managed to find a job to her liking in an art museum, and she felt truly happy for the first time in years. Over time, Connor and Vanessa fell in love, and 6 months later, Vanessa realized she was expecting a baby. "We need to let your parents know. I want us to get married, and I don't want to hide from your family," Connor said, and went to Vanessa's father to try to reconcile him and his daughter. Once in the house, he hadn't been in 15 years. Connor immediately realized that nothing had changed there over the years, and he was still not welcome. "No marriage ever!" shouted Vanessa's father angrily. "My daughter will never marry the maid's son. She should get rid of the child and go home, and you should disappear from her life at once." "Well, I wanted to be nice, but I guess that won't work," Connor replied. "I was once too young to protect my dying mother, but now I have enough strength and courage to protect your daughter. Vanessa won't show up here again, only if you come to your senses and beg her forgiveness." Vanessa's father's curses and threats poured out in response, accompanied by the quiet sobs of her unhappy mother. But Connor was no longer listening and went to the exit. Mrs. Brooke, Vanessa's mother, a weak-willed, silent woman, just as before, did not find the strength to disobey her despotic husband. Once Mrs. Brooke, just like Vanessa, dreamed of a career as an artist, and she was also promised a workshop and the freedom of creativity. But, deceived by her husband, she received only the dull, grey, everyday life of a rich but joyless home. Mrs. Brooke did not want her daughter to suffer the same fate, and so she was secretly glad that she had escaped her imprisonment and that she had someone ready to make her happy. That same day, Connor and Vanessa packed their belongings and moved to another city. With the proceeds from the sale of Connor's diamond ring and Vanessa's jewellery, given by her grandfather when he was still alive, they rented a modest space and opened a small art cafe. Vanessa decorated the walls with her own works, and after its opening, the cafe became one of the most popular places for creative people. The cafe often had thematic exhibitions, live music, and everyone who came there could share their creative plans with friends or learn something new for themselves. And when a few months later, the newlyweds had a little girl named Maria, after Connor's mother, Vanessa's mother unexpectedly came. "My dears, here I am. Forever. Will you shelter me? I can't live with this tyrant any more." "Of course, Mum," replied Vanessa and hugged her. "Now we will all live together and never be apart."